The night Naraya stepped into the square to save her sister, she thought she was surrendering to a monster. Then the Alpha of Stormreach looked at her like he'd just seen the one thing the gods had forbidden him to want. He said, "Your life for hers, my law for your soul," and the moon itself flickered red. Would you trade your freedom to save the one you love? Tell me in the comments, because this is how an Omega's sacrifice turned a ruthless Alpha into the one who fell first. Subscribe now, before the moon demands its next price. They called her desperate. She called it survival. Blackfin's famine had teeth, and the Alpha's tax demanded a sacrifice. Naraya would not let the moon take her sister, so she offered herself, body, bond, and name, to the man whose mercy was a myth. Cassian Rhine ruled Stormreach like winter itself, cold, precise, predictable. He didn't need a wife. He needed a weapon in silk, a living treaty with a pulse. The night they sealed the compact, moonlight burned their palms together. Her blood red, his silver, the parchment steaming as if it recognized defiance. He thought he'd bought obedience. She thought she'd traded freedom. Neither knew the bargain had teeth, and that the first heart to break wouldn't be hers. The gates of Stormreach Keep rose like jaws waiting to close. Snow fell in whispering sheets, catching the torchlight in tiny shards that looked like captured prayers. The air itself seemed disciplined here. No scent, no sound, no mercy. Naraya rode beneath the archway on a black warhorse, too proud for her touch. The saddle was lined with silver thread and cold authority. Around her, soldiers stood in symmetrical ranks, unmoving, unblinking. The silence didn't honor her arrival. It studied her. The doors groaned open into a hall that stretched like a cathedral built to house a single name. Cassian Rhine. The Alpha waited at the dais, no crown, no cloak, only the weight of power that required neither. His gaze met hers briefly, sharp as a blade drawn halfway. "You've arrived," he said. "I kept my bargain." He descended the steps, each measured like a verdict. The floor trembled faintly beneath his boots. The hall smelled of steel and cedar smoke. When he stopped before her, she realized how much taller the legend was in flesh. "You're smaller than rumor suggested," he said. "Rumor flatters," she replied. A faint smile ghosted across his lips. "You'll learn that Stormreach does not flatter anything it intends to keep." Behind him, the priestess Amaris Solin appeared, white-haired, her eyes fogged with moonlight. "The bond compact is ready," she said. "Do you understand what you surrender, Omega Naraya Vale?" "I surrender the right to run," Naraya said quietly. "And what do you demand in return?" "The right to stand," she answered. The priestess's lips curved faintly, almost in pity. "Then let the moon bear witness." The ceremony was brief, without affection, without warmth. Cassian's palm met hers above the silver seal. Blood mingled, hissed, and sealed their fates in smoke that smelled faintly of iron and storm. When the priestess spoke the final words, bound not by love but by law, the hall filled with the quiet hum of awe. Every noble and soldier present lowered their heads, not in respect but calculation. The Alpha had done the unthinkable, married an Omega to end a debt. And the Omega, she had become property of the most feared man in the north. Afterward, Cassian dismissed the witnesses with a gesture. Only Naraya, the priestess, and his shadowed guard Marek remained. "You will have quarters in the East Wing," he said. "You will dine when I dine, attend councils when I summon you, speak only when addressed. You will carry my scent when law requires proof." "Proof of what?" "That you belong to Stormreach." The words bit, but Naraya did not flinch. "Then Stormreach belongs to me in equal measure." A flicker crossed his eyes. Interest, maybe disbelief. "Careful," he said softly. "Equality is a word that burns. Then perhaps it's time someone got burned." The priestess's voice broke the tension. The moon hears all bargains, Alpha, even the ones made in jest. Nothing I say is jest, Cassian replied, gaze never leaving Neriah. Days bled into a rhythm of ceremony and silence. The halls of Stormreach watched her, as if waiting for a mistake. Servants bowed with practiced contempt. Courtiers whispered, the bought wolf behind silver goblets. Neriah ignored them. She memorized the keep instead. The echo of the war room doors, the rhythm of Cassian's boots on the marble floors, the way even the wind seemed to obey him. Once, she found herself staring out across the snow-buried valley below the battlements. From here, Blackfen was just a smudge of memory under the moon. Marek approached quietly. You stare like someone who forgot which side of the bars she's on. I haven't forgotten, Neriah said. I'm learning the locks. He laughed softly. Careful, Shield. Some locks bite. On the night of their wedding, the keep glowed dimly. No feast, no music, no flowers. Cassian entered her chamber as the moon hung low, its light slipping through the lattice like spilled silver. He wore no armor now, only quiet command. You expected a consummation, he said, reading her silence. I expected honesty, she replied. You'll find neither here. He crossed the room, stopping before her. You owe me obedience, not affection. The compact is clear. And if obedience costs me my soul, then you'll learn how to live without one, he said, voice a perfect calm. He turned toward the balcony, the moonlight painting his profile in cold silver. For a heartbeat, something almost human crossed his face, a flicker of the man beneath the myth. Outside, thunder rolled across the peaks. The moon's light shivered red against the window. The priestess, far below in her sanctum, looked up suddenly from her prayers. The moon bleeds, she whispered, and that means the vow has been heard. As the storm rose and the torches guttered, Neriah whispered into the silence. Then let the moon witness, Cassian Rhine. If I am caged in honor, I will learn to make the cage remember my name. The wind carried her vow straight to the Alpha's chambers. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, the Ruthless one could not sleep. The days in Stormreach Keep settled into a rhythm of silence and scrutiny. Every corridor hummed with power, every glance weighed intent. Neriah learned quickly that here words were weapons, and silence was the scabbard that kept them sharp. She rose before dawn, when even the torches seemed afraid to burn too brightly. Her duties began in the council chambers, not as participant, but as ornament, standing beside Cassian's chair, scent-marked by his presence, invisible in every other way. Yet even in silence she listened, to the cadence of war reports, to the pattern of how Cassian paused before passing judgment, to how his court bowed deepest not to wisdom, but to fear. One morning, Cassian dismissed the council early. The air was thick with unsaid defiance. A merchant had accused a noble of smuggling weapons across the frost line, and everyone waited for Cassian's wrath to ignite. Instead, the Alpha had only said, "Bring me proof, I punish truth, not rumor." When the room cleared, Neriah lingered. That was mercy, she said quietly. He looked at her, expression unreadable. That was efficiency. Mercy wastes time. And yet time listens longer to mercy than to fear. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Then, almost inaudibly, he murmured, "You mistake patience for kindness." "I mistake nothing," she said, meeting his gaze. "But I've learned that the cruelest men talk like scholars when they're trying to convince themselves they're right." He turned away, but not before she saw the faintest twitch of his jaw, a muscle fighting a memory. That was the first time he didn't order her out of the room. Stormreach had a private training hall, a circle of stone beneath the keep where warriors sparred under torchlight and dripping water. When Marek, the captain of the guard, found Neriah watching from the shadows, he smirked. "Thinking of running?" he asked. "Thinking of surviving," she replied. He tossed her a wooden blade, then learned something useful. By the end of the hour, she was bruised, breathless, and smiling for the first time in months. She trained every morning after that, until her arms ached and her mind began to understand the rhythm of strength. Cassian noticed, not with words but with a pause in his gaze when she entered the war room one evening, her wrists wrapped in leather guards, her stance unafraid. "You're not required to fight," he said. "No," she answered, "but I intend to stop losing." Something shifted in the room, small, silent, dangerous. Amaris, the priestess, began tutoring Nariah and Stormreach's laws of accord, the codes by which pacts bound territories, debts, and lives. It was in those candlelit lessons that Nariah realized how power truly moved in Stormreach, not through claws or crowns, but through paper, through words sharp enough to draw blood. Cassian built his empire on loopholes, Amaris told her one night. He won every war before the swords were drawn. "Then I'll learn his grammar," Nariah replied. "You already are," Amaris said. "He's watching you closer than you think." It happened on the 5th moon after her arrival. The great hall was full, nobles, merchants, emissaries from rival pacts. Nariah stood beside Cassian as always, silent and still. But that day, Lord Arvin Holt, a silver-tongued noble with a predator's smile, decided to test her. He circled closer during debate, pretending deference. "The bonded shield stands so still," he drawled. "Perhaps Stormreach's alpha prefers his ornaments quiet." Laughter rippled through the court. Nariah's eyes didn't move. Perhaps Stormreach's nobles mistake a silent wolf for a sleeping one. The laughter died instantly. Arvin chuckled under his breath, then reached out, brushing a stray strand of her hair. "Careful, my lady," he whispered. "Even sleeping wolves can be leashed." The world stopped. Cassian's hand shot out, catching Arvin's wrist mid-motion. A single crack split the silence, bone breaking clean. Arvin screamed. The echo rang like judgment. Cassian didn't raise his voice. "Touch what bears my scent again," he said, "and you'll lose the arm, not the wrist." He released the man, turned and looked at Nariah. His eyes were cold, but the tremor beneath the surface was not fury. It was possession. That night, the halls whispered louder than ever. The Alpha defended his Omega. No, he defended his property. No one defends property with that much rage. In her chamber, Nariah sat by the window, tracing the scar on her palm where their bond had been sealed. For the first time, she wondered if Cassian's cruelty was not armor, but discipline, and what would happen if it ever cracked. In the corridor below, she heard his boot stop outside her door. A pause, then retreat. He didn't knock. Neither of them slept. At dawn, the priestess Amaris found Cassian in the war hall, writing something on a blank scroll. "What are you drafting?" she asked. "An amendment to the compact," he said, not looking up. She frowned. "To change what?" He dipped the quill, voice low. "To ensure obedience. Doesn't feel like affection." Amaris's gaze flickered toward the eastern wing where Nariah slept. "Be careful, Alpha," she said softly. "The moon rewrites contracts written in denial." The storms came early that year. Snow fell in waves thick as memory, coating the walls of Stormreach Keep in silence. The world below looked like parchment, white, empty, waiting to be rewritten. Inside, the Alpha's council had gathered again, and Nariah stood once more beside Cassian's chair. What had begun as obedience now looked like habit, or perhaps something closer to belonging. The nobles had grown restless. Rumors bled through the hall like smoke. Stormreach's mercy was softening, its Alpha distracted. The name Nariah Vale had become a whispered weapon. Cassian ignored them. That was his power, his stillness. But Nariah had learned that stillness was also a language, and today she would speak it fluently. A messenger arrived before dawn, wrapped in furs, breath steaming, eyes downcast. He carried a sealed parchment stamped with the Blackfen crest. Nariah broke it open with shaking fingers. "The truce holds. The raids have ceased. The crops rise again. Your sister lives." Relief cut through her like wind. She closed her eyes, clutching the parchment to her chest. Cassian's voice came from behind her, quiet but edged. "You were expecting bad news." "I was expecting payment," she said softly. He tilted his head. "Payment?" "For the debt that made me yours." Something flickered in his expression, something she couldn't name yet. "You're not mine, Nariah Vale," he said. "You are the moon's. I am only the man foolish enough to manage her bargains." A week later, a courier from the Frostborn pack arrived, brash, armored, reeking of pride. He carried a silver scroll and a smile too wide for courtesy. "Alpha Rhine," he declared, "the Frostborn Alliance demands new borders. Your truce with Blackfen weakens the Northern Ring." "Then strengthen your own," Cassian replied without rising. The courier's eyes flicked toward Nariah. "Stormreach keeps strange company these days." Cassian's hand curled once against the table, but it was Nariah who stepped forward. "The Alpha's company is his own affair," she said. "But I see why Frostborn fears him. He's learned to fight without drawing blood." A ripple of laughter ran through the chamber, half nervous, half impressed. The courier sneered. "And who speaks for Stormreach now?" "It's Pet Omega?" Cassian stood slowly. "She speaks because I allow it. You breathe because I do the same. Choose which to lose." The courier bowed, pale and trembling. Frostborn withdraws its demand. The council erupted into whispers. The Alpha of Stormreach had let an Omega defy another pack in his presence, and had not silenced her. That night the keep felt colder. Nariah could sense it, the way the noble's stares lingered longer, the way conversations ended when she entered. Marek warned her quietly. "Every throne casts a shadow. Today you stepped into it." "I didn't mean to," she said. "Intent never mattered to those who fear what they can't control." When Cassian passed her in the corridor that evening, his voice was low but deliberate. "You took a risk in that council." "So did you," she said. His gaze lingered on her face. "You mistake protection for permission. And you mistake fear for loyalty," she replied. For a long moment, the silence between them felt less like distance and more like restraint. He turned away first. "The moon has strange humor," he said. "She teaches through those who should have stayed silent." "Then you should start listening," Nariah murmured. That night, Cassian called a private audience with Amaris, the priestess. The candlelight threw their shadows across the stone like warring spirits. "She's defiant," he said, "unpredictable." "And alive," Amaris replied, "which is more than I can say for most things in this keep. She endangers the order I built. No, Cassian Rhine, she exposes the flaw in it. Order without compassion rots into tyranny. You know this. You've always known this." His jaw tightened. "Compassion costs blood." "Then perhaps that's why the moon gave you a heart large enough to bleed twice." He said nothing. Outside, thunder crawled across the mountains like a warning. Later that week, Nariah found Cassian in the war hall, standing alone before the great map of the Northern Territories. The fire painted half his face in gold, half in shadow. "Why didn't you silence me today?" she asked. He didn't turn. "Because I wanted to see if you'd survive the silence afterward." "I did." "You did more than that." Now he turned, slowly. "You taught a room of wolves how to bow to someone without fangs." Nariah stepped closer, the air between them tightening. "What is it you want from me, Cassian?" "I don't know anymore," he said. "But I know this. I can no longer remember where my law ends and your defiance begins." For a heartbeat, the world was too small for both of them. She took a step back, trembling but unbroken. "Who taught you to survive this well?" he asked, voice quieter than fire. She met his gaze, her tone steady. "Hunger." Cassian's breath caught, and for the first time he looked away. The flames shuddered. The moon outside the high window flared white, then red. And somewhere deep beneath Stormreach, the priestess whispered to the wind, "The compact is shifting, and the Alpha is beginning to feel it." Stormreach had never known quiet like this. The keep was still, but not peaceful, the kind of stillness that comes when the air holds its breath before a storm. The Alpha had changed, and the pack could smell it. Where his orders once fell like hammers, now they landed like questions. Where fear once ruled the court, hesitation had taken its throne. And it all began the day Nariah Vale walked into his war room and refused to bow. Cassian Rhine had always believed that mercy was just the prettiest form of weakness, but lately, when Nariah spoke, calm, deliberate, unflinching, the iron inside his bones began to feel like something too heavy to carry. He found himself delaying punishments, listening before judging. He caught himself staring at the fire longer than he should, wondering what she saw when she looked at him and didn't look away. The nobles noticed. The servants whispered, "Stormreach is softening," they said. "The Omega is taming the wolf." They were wrong, of course. She wasn't taming him. She was reminding him that before ruthlessness, there had once been reason, but reason alone was a fragile crown. That night, as frost clung to the edges of the windows, a messenger arrived from Black Fen, his cloak shredded by wind. He collapsed before the guards, clutching a sealed note bound in pale blue twine. The moment Nariah saw the color, her heart stopped. It was Leora's mark. "Sister, the fever spreads. The moon burns me at both ends. I am afraid. Please, come home before the snow takes me." The ink bled where tears had fallen. Nariah's knees nearly gave way. She ran, not to her chambers, not to pray, but straight to the war hall where Cassian stood over the map of the northern ridges, candlelight carving his features into marble. She didn't wait for permission. "Leora is dying." He looked up, eyes narrowing. "How long?" "Days, maybe less. I have to go." "You can't." "I'm not asking." Their voices cracked like ice underfoot. "You think you can cross the Frostlands alone?" he said. "Rogue packs roam that path. You'd be dead before dawn." "Then let me die moving toward her." Something broke behind his eyes, a fracture too quick to hide. He turned sharply, fists tightening at his sides. "You're bound to me by compact, Nariah. Your life is law. I cannot lose you to sentiment. And I cannot lose her to your laws," she said, stepping closer. "I didn't trade my soul to become your prisoner." Cassian's voice dropped to a whisper, low and furious. "You are not my prisoner." "Then prove it." The fire crackled between them like a third heartbeat. For the first time since their bargain began, he had no command to give. He looked at her, at the desperation that refused to disguise itself, at the defiance that made him remember what it was to care. And something inside him surrendered. "Go," he said finally, voice breaking like old stone. "Take my crest. It will open every gate between here and Blackfen. Take 2 riders, my fastest horses, and don't make me regret this." She blinked back tears. "Cassian." "Don't thank me," he said. "Just come back alive. I'm not done arguing with you." Snow swallowed her within hours. The Frostlands howled, and wind clawed at her cloak like teeth. She rode hard, the Alpha's crest glinting faintly at her throat, a single mark of protection against a world that owed her nothing. When the first pack of rogues appeared on the ridge, she didn't flinch. She whispered Cassian's name once and loosed an arrow into the dark. Somehow they didn't follow, as if the air itself had remembered whose scent she carried. By dawn, Blackfen rose from the mist like a ghost she'd outlived. Leora lay small beneath the firs, her skin pale, her breath shallow. Nariah worked without rest. Herbs, prayers, every remedy she remembered from their mother's songs. Days bled into nights. The fever fought hard, but Nariah had learned from Stormreach, nothing that survives mercy fears persistence. On the 7th night, Leora's breathing steadied. The fever broke. Nariah fell to her knees, sobbing, from relief, from exhaustion, from something unnamed that pressed against her ribs, like light trying to get in. When she looked down at her hand, she saw the mark of the compact faintly glowing. Not bright, but steady. Cassian was waiting, And somehow, she knew he felt it too. It took her 12 days to return to Stormreach. When the gates came into view, she saw movement on the parapet, a lone figure standing against the wind. Cassian. He didn't move as she approached, but when she dismounted, he crossed the courtyard faster than she expected, his cloak snapping like a banner. She was pale, scarred, half frozen, but alive. He stopped before her, breath misting between them. His eyes moved to the thin cut along her temple. Who did this? No one that still breathes. He exhaled, long and uneven, then motioned to Marek. Clear the courtyard. But Alpha, now. The men vanished. Silence remained. Cassian reached for her arm, then hesitated, as though touching her might undo the restraint he'd built his life upon. Finally he spoke. Next time, you'll tell me before you risk your life. Next time, she said softly, you'll understand why I don't ask permission to save love. For once, he didn't argue. He reached out, fingers brushing the edge of the scar across her temple, tracing it as if reading a confession written in flesh. She didn't pull away. The fire between them wasn't born of desire. It was recognition. A silent truth. You hurt because you care, and you care because I survived. His voice was low, shaking against his will. You shouldn't have come back. Then why are you shaking? His hand dropped. Because I thought I'd forgotten how to. The moon flared white through the window. For the first time in years, Cassian Rhine closed his eyes, not to command his world, but to keep it from collapsing around the one person who no longer feared him. From the upper gallery, the priestess Amaris watched unseen. Her whisper slid into the air like prophecy. The compact has changed. The Alpha's pulse now answers hers. The cage he built for control has begun to break. The storm came the night peace tried to settle. It rolled in without warning, swallowing the peaks in black thunder and flame-edged lightning. By dawn, Stormreach Keep was a fortress of whispers, half the pack claiming they'd seen fire fall from the sky, the other half swearing they'd seen the moon itself flicker red. In truth, something had changed. The mark on Cassian's hand burned brighter every night Neriah was near, and though neither of them dared speak it aloud, both understood. Their bond was no longer written by ink or blood. It was alive. Cassian stood in the war hall, staring at the northern map as snow dripped from his cloak onto the stone. They're testing me, he said. The Frostborn Lords have delayed tribute. The South Border Patrol hasn't reported in 4 days. Marek shifted beside him. The nobles grow restless. They whisper that your heart has gone soft. Cassian's jaw tensed. Then let them test the softness of my steel. From the shadows near the hearth, Neriah spoke quietly. They don't fear your blade anymore, Cassian. They fear your change. He turned toward her. Do you? I don't fear what's honest, she said, only what hides behind it. Their eyes met, too long, too steady. Marek excused himself, the door closing on the silence they left hanging between them. That night, Cassian found her in the courtyard, standing beneath a tree coated in frost. Stormreach doesn't sleep easily, she said without turning. Neither do I. You used to. He stopped behind her, his breath clouding the air between them. You've been here long enough to think you know me. I've been here long enough to know you don't know yourself. She turned, the wind tugging her hair loose. Cassian stepped closer until the scent of her heartbeat blurred logic. He caught himself, barely, before he reached for her. Don't mistake curiosity for care, he said, voice brittle. And don't mistake fear for control, she replied. For a moment, all the storms in Stormreach existed in the space between them. The rebellion struck 3 nights later. A noble councillor, Lord Arvin Holt, the same man whose wrist Cassian had once broken, returned with vengeance and a dozen blades sworn to Frostborn gold. They came under the guise of diplomacy. They left a trail of corpses. By the time the alarm bells rang, the West Wing was burning. Marek's voice echoed through the keep. Protect the Alpha. Cassian cut down 3 men before the 4th drove a dagger into his side. He stumbled, catching himself against the war table, blood spreading through his tunic like spilled ink. And then he heard her. Naraya's voice, cutting through the chaos. Cassian! He turned to see her sprinting through smoke, her eyes blazing with defiance and terror. She shouldn't have been there. Every instinct in him screamed that, but she was, because she'd never obeyed any law that demanded she stay behind. One of the traitors lunged for her. Cassian didn't think. He moved. The clash of steel rang like thunder. When the man fell, Cassian's breath came shallow, his wound gaping, but his hand still found hers through the haze. Stay back, he rasped. Then you'll die alone, she said, refusing to release him. The ceiling cracked, flames licked down the pillars. Smoke and moonlight blurred the world into something holy and cruel. As Cassian faltered, Naraya's hand caught his arm. The moment their palms met, the old mark between them ignited. White, blinding, alive. A pulse tore through the hall, scattering embers into orbits of light. The dying flames turned silver. The blood on Cassian's side vanished like morning frost. Marek, bursting through the doorway, froze. Moon preserve us, he whispered. What? What did she do? The priestess Amaris appeared behind him, her voice trembling. She didn't heal him. The bond did. The compact has evolved. The Alpha has fallen. When the fires were extinguished and the last of the rebels dragged to the cells, Cassian lay half-conscious on the war table, Naraya kneeling beside him. You saved me, he murmured, barely aware of his own words. I reminded the moon what she owed, she said softly. He tried to smile but couldn't. The moon doesn't owe. She collects. Then she'll take her payment from me. He reached for her hand again, grip weak but desperate. Don't you dare speak of cost. I've paid enough. You haven't begun, she whispered. Days passed. Cassian recovered slowly, but his old composure never returned. He sat in silence through meetings. He ignored the noble's eyes, and when Naraya entered the hall, he no longer dismissed her. He listened. At night, he would dream of firelight and her voice calling his name through smoke. He would wake with his chest burning, where her mark had seared into him, as though the moon had branded mercy into his flesh. Stormreach was quiet again, but it was not the same quiet. Every torch burned lower. Every law sounded older, because mercy had entered the keep, and mercy changes everything it touches. One night, as Cassian stood alone on the parapet, snow falling around him, he whispered into the wind, "The moon doesn't bless twice." And yet, she has. Behind him, Naraya's voice broke the silence, soft as prayer. Then stop pretending it's a curse. He turned toward her, the silver in his eyes catching the starlight. No words followed, only the kind of silence that could either save them or destroy them both. The moon above Stormreach was whole again, too whole. It gleamed over the black towers like an unblinking eye, watching as the man who had once sworn never to need anything found himself losing battles that could not be fought with a blade. Cassian Rhine, the ruthless Alpha, the war-born ruler of the North, had begun to feel. And that, he realized, was far more dangerous than bleeding. The keep had grown uneasy in the weeks since the uprising. The nobles bowed, but their eyes no longer hid their resentment. They whispered in corners about a bond that broke the laws of nature, an Omega who had rewritten the Alpha's fate. Cassian ignored the rumors, at least in public. In private, he could not ignore the way his hand still burned where Naraya's mark had fused with his own. Every time she walked into a room, the ache returned, steady, unrelenting, alive. Marek noticed it first. "You're distracted," he said one morning, standing over a map of the northern passes. "Watch your tongue," Cassian muttered. "Then watch your eyes," Marek replied. "Because the court already has." Cassian said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence had become confession enough. The tension broke on the night of the Moon Council. Cassian stood before the assembly, cold and precise as always, reciting orders and new decrees. But when a noble questioned his reforms, why punish less harshly? Why forgive debts? Why temper war with restraint? Cassian said something that stunned even himself. Because mercy, he said, is the truest form of strength. The hall froze. Arvin Holt's brother, Lord Daxon, rose from his seat, voice sharp. Mercy? That word doesn't belong in Stormreach's tongue. You're letting your consort rewrite our laws. Nariah stood at the edge of the dais, calm but burning with awareness. Cassian's eyes found hers across the chamber. The connection, wordless, similar electric, was impossible to hide. The nobles saw it, and in that instant, every whisper turned to prophecy. That same night, Cassian found Nariah in the eastern hall, her hair undone, her shoulders gleaming in moonlight. You defied me again, he said, in front of them. No, she replied. I reminded them what leadership looks like. He stepped closer. You remind me too much. Her pulse quickened, but she didn't retreat. Then perhaps the moon sent me to remind you of the man you buried. He stared at her, long, dangerous, silent. Then something in him snapped. He reached for her hand, pressing her palm to the mark on his chest. The bond ignited, a slow surge of silver fire crawling up both their arms. Tell me this isn't real, he said. She whispered, You wouldn't believe me if I did. The air between them turned molten. For the first time, the ruthless alpha broke his own rule. He touched her without permission, not in command, but in surrender. The kiss that followed wasn't gentle. It was desperate, the kind of collision that only happens when two people realize the world will punish them for it, and do it anyway. When he pulled back, his voice trembled like something raw and new. God's help me, Nariah. I thought the bond would consume you, but it's consuming me. At dawn, the traitor struck. While the Alpha slept for the first time in years, with peace instead of vigilance, his council plotted. Daxon Holt, burning with vengeance for his brother, rallied those who still believed Stormreach's strength came from cruelty. They broke into the armory, slaughtered the sentries, and poisoned the Night Watch wine. When Marek burst into Cassian's chambers, he was already bleeding from a knife wound. They're coming for her, he gasped. Cassian was on his feet in seconds. He tore through the halls, half-dressed, his sword drawn, his mind a blur of rage and realization. They didn't want the throne. They wanted her. By the time he reached the main hall, chaos ruled. Torches toppled, blades clashed, and screams mingled with the whine of steel. Cassian waded into the fight like a storm given shape. His blade cut through betrayal and blood alike, but there were too many. And when Daxon himself appeared from the smoke, sneering, Cassian knew what this was, a reckoning for mercy. You fell for her, Daxon hissed. The moon marks fools like you to remind the rest of us what happens when kings forget to be wolves. Cassian lunged, their swords meeting with a clash that echoed through the keep. Nariah ran toward them, ignoring Marek's shout. She caught sight of Cassian's wound reopening, crimson soaking through his tunic. She screamed his name. Daxon turned towards her, blade raised. Cassian moved without thinking, his body between hers and death. The sword drove through his side. The world fell silent. Cassian dropped to his knees. His blood steamed on the frozen ground. Daxon smirked, stepping closer. Even gods bleed for love, he sneered. Before he could strike again, Nariah's hand shot out, grasping Cassian's. Their marks flared, brighter than the torches, brighter than the moon. A shockwave rippled outward, knocking soldiers off their feet. Daxon screamed as silver fire consumed his blade and burned the mark from his wrist. Nariah knelt beside Cassian, tears streaking her face. You can't die, she whispered. Not now. He smiled faintly through the pain. I told you mercy costs blood. Then take mine, she said. Her mark glowed so fiercely that even the priestess Amaris, miles away in her sanctum, felt the shift in the air and fell to her knees. Cassian's eyes fluttered. He could feel the moon's pull, the balance demanding payment. "No," Naraya whispered, pressing her forehead to his. "I won't let the moon take you." But the light was already spreading. He could feel her offering part of herself to save him. Her strength, her voice, her will. He caught her chin with trembling fingers. "Don't, you've given enough." "Then stop me." He couldn't. The world went white. When the light faded, Daxon and his men lay dead, their marks burned away. Cassian's wound was gone, but so was the warmth in Naraya's skin. She collapsed beside him, her breath faint. He gathered her in his arms, voice breaking for the first time. "You can't leave me now. Not after you've made me remember how to live." Her lips moved, barely audible. "You fell first, Cassian." Then her eyes closed. The moon above Stormreach glowed blood-red once more. At the top of the keep, the priestess Amaris watched the light fade and whispered to the wind, "The Alpha has fallen. The moon will demand balance, and before mercy can reign, one heart must rise again." The fires of Stormreach had burned to ash by dawn. Smoke drifted like ghosts through the silent courtyard. No victory songs, no cheers, only the creak of scorched wood and the hollow sound of a kingdom holding its breath. Cassian knelt in the center of it all, Naraya's body in his arms. Her skin was pale, her breath shallow. Her lips parted in silence. The mark on her wrist glowed faintly, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. It should have comforted him. It didn't, because the stronger his pulse grew, the weaker hers became. The priestess Amaris Solen arrived with the morning light, her white cloak darkened by soot and snow. She stopped beside the fallen pair, her ancient eyes soft with sorrow. "The moon has spoken," she whispered. Cassian lifted his head, voice rough. "Then tell her to speak again." Amaris shook her head. "The bond has been rewritten. She gave her life to restore yours. The balance must hold." "She didn't give it," Cassian said, jaw trembling. "She offered it, and I refused." "Refusal doesn't unmake sacrifice," the priestess murmured. "The moon accepts what is given freely." He rose slowly, still holding Naraya, and the snow around them hissed as his blood dripped into it. His voice dropped to a growl. "Then the moon can take it back from me." Amaris stepped closer, her tone careful. "Cassian, no," he cut in, eyes burning with grief and defiance. "If the moon demands balance, then let her weigh me instead." "The moon doesn't bargain with those who love too late," she said softly. Cassian looked down at Naraya, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then she'll learn." He carried her through the snow to the ancient moon sanctum, a cave carved into the mountain long before Stormreach had a name. Torches guttered along the walls, their flames bending toward him as he passed. Amaris followed in silence, whispering incantations that even she no longer believed could change what was coming. At the altar, Cassian laid Naraya down. The carved stone glowed faintly beneath her, recognizing the mark of its chosen. "She saved you," Amaris said quietly. "She bound her life to yours in the final moment." "Then bind me to her," he said. Amaris hesitated. "That ritual demands more than you understand." "I understand enough," Cassian said. "It takes blood, doesn't it?" "Take it. You can't bargain with fate." "I don't need to bargain," he said, stepping closer to the altar. "I'm here to defy it." Amaris raised her hands. The air thickened, the cave trembling with unseen power. Silver light spilled from the altar, crawling across the floor, like veins of living fire. "Moon of balance," Amaris intoned. "We call upon you to witness the vow of reversal, one soul offered for another." Cassian stepped forward, voice low but clear. "Take my strength, my rank, my life, but give her voice back." The flames flickered violently, the cave moaning under the pressure of ancient power. Then a voice, not Amaris's, filled the chamber. Soft, cold, eternal. "The Alpha's heart is weighed. The debt cannot be traded, only transformed." Cassian fell to his knees. Then transform it. The light flared so brightly it seared his vision. The moon's voice echoed once more. One must fade for the other to rise. The offering stands, the bond endures. Choose the form of your pain. Cassian's voice cracked. If she must live, then take her memories of me. Let her be free. Done. The light exploded outward. Amaris cried out, shielding her face as the force rippled through the mountain. When the glow dimmed, Nariah gasped, a sudden, violent breath that filled the sanctum with life. Her eyes fluttered open, clear and wide, but unfocused. She looked around, confused, trembling. Where am I? Cassian smiled through tears, his voice breaking. Home. She blinked at him, recognition absent. Who are you? His breath caught. No one important. He stepped back as Amaris approached, wrapping a cloak around Nariah's shoulders. She remembers nothing of the bond, the priestess whispered. The moon took your name from her heart. Cassian watched as Amaris led Nariah toward the cave's mouth. The moonlight traced her silhouette, fragile, radiant, free. When she paused to look back, her gaze brushed over him without meaning. No bond, no mark, no memory, only peace. He smiled faintly. It hurt more than dying. She's safe now, he murmured. Amaris stopped beside him, laying a gentle hand on his shoulder. You know she will wander. The world won't be kind to her. Then I'll be her shadow, Cassian said. The world won't touch her without going through me first. When they returned to Stormreach, the court found their alpha changed. He no longer smiled, no longer raged, only ruled with a calm so cold it silenced even rumor. The nobles whispered again, but differently now. The alpha died that night, they said. The man who walks in his place is only what's left. And they were right, because though Cassian Rhine still breathed, it was Nariah's name that filled every one of his silences. Weeks later, as he stood on the parapet staring toward the Frostlands, a faint melody drifted across the wind. Soft, wordless, haunting. A woman's voice. He froze. Impossible, he whispered. Marek appeared beside him. What is it? Cassian's eyes filled with disbelief and something like hope. It's her. Far beyond the mountains, under a silver sky, the moon shone brighter than ever. And the wind carried Nariah's song, a tune without words, but heavy with memory. She didn't know his name, but her soul still remembered. The winter that followed was the longest in Stormreach's history. The snow refused to melt, the rivers slowed to glass, and the moon hung low every night, as if she too mourned what she'd taken. Cassian Rhine ruled, but not as the man he once was. He moved through the keep like a ghost, who still wore his armor out of habit. The nobles feared him again, but this time not for his wrath. They feared the silence that came after his orders, because grief had made him sharper than cruelty ever did. He had no mate, no heir, no rest. Only purpose, to find the woman whose voice had once woken the gods. The priestess Amaris called it obsession. Marek called it duty. Cassian called it neither. He simply followed the sound only he could hear, the faint melody that haunted his sleep. Every night, he dreamed of a song sung by a woman with no name. Every dawn, he followed it north. He crossed mountains and valleys, visited temples, interrogated travelers, and bribed priests. For months, nothing, just silence and snow. Until one dusk, as the sky turned violet, he reached a monastery ruin buried in frost. Smoke curled faintly from one of its broken towers, and through the wind, he heard it again, soft, steady, wordless, her song. Cassian dismounted and climbed the hill. The wind tore at his cloak, but he didn't feel the cold. Each step felt like walking through time. Inside the ruined hall, wolves padded quietly between pews, their eyes gentle instead of wild. At the altar stood Nariah, her back to him, sunlight pouring over her shoulders. Her hair was shorter now, her clothes simple, her wrists bare. She was humming, surrounded by orphaned pups too young to shift. She turned when she felt him near. Her eyes met his, and for one impossible moment, the world stopped. She didn't know him, but her heart recognized him. The silence between them was alive. Cassian spoke first, his voice barely a whisper. "I've crossed 3 kingdoms to find a ghost." Naraya tilted her head, studying him. "And did you?" He exhaled. "No, I found a miracle." She blinked, unsure why her eyes stung. "I know you," she said softly, "but I don't know why." He smiled faintly. "Because the moon forgot to take everything." Over the weeks that followed, Cassian stayed in the monastery. He never asked her to remember. He helped her rebuild. Together they fed the wolves, cared for the orphaned cubs, and rebuilt the old chapel into what she called the Sanctuary of Mercy. Word spread. Omegas, widows, exiled wolves, those broken by old laws, found their way to the sanctuary. Cassian protected them, fought off raiders, brought food through the blizzards. He never used his title, but they called him the Alpha of Mercy nonetheless. Every night, Naraya sang to the pups by the fire. She didn't know why the sound made Cassian's hands shake, but sometimes, in the middle of a song, she'd look up and see him staring at her, like he was remembering for both of them. And something deep inside her chest would ache, like love trapped behind glass. Spring came late, but it came. One morning, the Silver Council rode to the monastery, their banners fluttering in the thawing air. They dismounted before Cassian, bowing low. "Stormreach needs its alpha," the spokesman said. "Without you, the realm splinters." Cassian's gaze drifted to Naraya. "Stormreach needs more than an alpha. It needs a reason to stop bleeding." Naraya stepped closer. "Then give it one." He studied her for a long time. Then he nodded. "Come with me." They rode back together, through forests waking from frost, through villages that paused to stare. When they reached the gates of Stormreach, the guards fell to their knees. The Alpha had returned, and beside him rode a woman with no crown, no mark, but a presence that made the air itself bow. In the great hall, Cassian summoned every noble, every elder, every priest. He stood beside Naraya before the throne and spoke with a clarity that made even the chandeliers tremble. "The age of dominance ends tonight," he said. "Stormreach will no longer measure worth by rank, scent, or blood. We will measure it by mercy." Gasps filled the room. A noble shouted, "That's heresy." Cassian drew his sword and laid it across his palms. "Then let mercy be our new heresy." He turned to Naraya. "You once told me that cages remember names, so will history." He lowered his sword and knelt before her. "Naraya Vale, you were my bond, my defiance, my undoing. If the moon took your memories, she left me enough for both of us. Will you rule beside me, not as bonded shield, but as Luna of mercy?" Naraya's breath hitched. The room blurred. She couldn't remember their story, but she felt it, every piece of it. She took his hand. "I don't remember the vows we made." "Then we'll make new ones." The priestess Amaris stepped forward, tears gleaming in her eyes. "The moon approves this union," she said softly, "and for once, she asks for nothing in return." She raised her staff. Silver light filled the hall, weaving around Cassian and Naraya, like threads of living moonlight. When it faded, 2 crescent marks glowed faintly on their wrists, identical, balanced. The nobles fell to their knees. Outside, the moon shone full and white, no longer bleeding. That night, the people of Stormreach lit candles across every street and window. The once feared fortress became a beacon of quiet light. Naraya and Cassian stood on the same balcony where once he'd spoken to her only of obedience. Now he said nothing. He simply took her hand and looked at the horizon as if the world had finally forgiven him. Below them, the bells tolled, soft, slow, and reverent. Amaris's voice carried through the wind, a benediction whispered to all who would remember. He thought he'd claimed her in a bargain. Instead, Mercy claimed him. Thus, the ruthless learned compassion, and the caged learned how to rule. The moon rose higher, serene at last, and for the first time in centuries, Stormreach slept without fear. The Alpha who fell for Mercy built a kingdom that never forgot her name.